My girlfriend Willow, a wealthy heiress, once again abandoned me to be with her true love. When she returned home, I found no trace of myself left there. Only a contract her father had paid for hiring me to pretend to be her boyfriend. Yet she still refused to believe that after pursuing her for 5 years, I could truly walk away. She thought I was simply jealous of her true love because I cared too much and planned to coax me back when I returned. What she never dreamed of was that our next meeting would be 4 years later. By then, I had already become a rising star in the business world and was engaged to a fiancé I had met abroad. Willow had been unconscious for 3 days, and I stayed by her side without changing my clothes or sleeping properly for those 3 days. Every 2 hours I would dip a cotton swab in water and carefully moisten her lips. On the morning of the 4th day, Willow finally opened her eyes. I was kneeling at her bedside, my eyes red with guilt. "Willow, you're finally awake in the kitchen." Her favorite 6 dishes and 1 soup were kept warm. Her room had been playing the soft music she loved all along, even though she hadn't woken for 4 days. The moment she opened her eyes, everything was still just the way she liked it. Willow nodded. I helped her slowly sit up and lean against the headboard. Then I took the porridge the servant handed over, blowing on it to cool it down, and brought the spoon to her lips while constantly asking if she was feeling any better. Willow, reaching for her phone, replied casually, "Much better." Halfway through the bowl, Willow frowned and pushed my hand away. I quickly pulled out a tissue to wipe the porridge from the corner of her mouth. And while she was getting up, I went to the wardrobe to fetch her favorite pale pink silk nightgown to Willow. All of this was simply taken for granted. She kept scrolling through her phone as if afraid to miss some important message. While kneeling to help her put on her slippers, I accidentally caught sight of a name partially displayed on her phone screen. Makoto. I quickly turned away, pretending I hadn't seen anything, but in my heart I was already counting the time. It should be about right now. With that thought, I went into the bathroom, took out my phone, and called Mr. Liu, her father. The moment the call connected, the deep, rich voice of a middle school-aged man came through, George, breaking up right after graduation. "After all these years, you really had no feelings for Willow at all." It sounded half like a sigh, half like a question. The pressure in the voice of someone in power made it hard for me to breathe. I didn't answer. I just looked out the window through the glass. A small bird used the branches to spring into the sky. After a long while, I finally spoke softly. "Uncle, thank you for your care over these years, but you should understand this was always a transaction. Talking about feelings now would be laughable. Besides, you have an excellent daughter. Willow has waited for the person she wanted to wait for, and I have received the payment I deserved. All 3 of us are satisfied. That's the best outcome." On the other end of the line, Uncle Lou let out a heavy sigh. His words tinged with a hint of regret. "Actually, I always thought highly of you. It's just a pity." Then his tone shifted. "Willow is far too headstrong. You've been wronged all these years. Luckily now that Makoto is back, I don't have to worry about her anymore. But as for you back then, I promise that as long as you stayed with her and made sure she graduated smoothly, you could choose any university at home or abroad. Can you tell me now where you want to go?" I gazed out the window at the branches, swaying unsteadily in the air from momentum, and for a moment I was lost in thought. In my 2nd year of high school, Willow entered my world. From then on, my life seemed to have been put on pause. After so many years, I had almost forgotten my original dreams. My chest felt hollow. I nodded. "I'll send it to you later. Thank you in advance, Uncle Lou." When the call ended, the branches outside finally stilled. Was that a sign of what my future life would be? My family was poor, but I had my own strength. In my 2nd year of high school, the school leaders brought me before President Liu and asked if I was willing to be the young lady's companion student. The job required matching her schedule, cooking, cleaning, taking care of her daily life and mental well-being. Anyone with a shred of pride would have refused outright, but I didn't. I nodded because I was far too short on money, so short that if I shook my head, I wouldn't even know where my next meal was coming from yet. If it meant giving up the hard-to-earn chance to continue my studies, how could I accept that? Mr. Liu looked at me. My clothes washed so many times they'd faded, but still spotless, my bearing neither humble nor arrogant, and he seemed satisfied. After a moment's hesitation, he said, "Our Willow has a bad temper. Whether you can stay by her side will depend on your own Billy." Mr. Liu told me there was another boy around Willow. They were childhood sweethearts, well matched in family background. But Makoto was an unconventional young man, too wild and rebellious. Ever since childhood, Willow had followed him, becoming known in their circle as a little delinquent girl. Mr. Liu disliked this great, but to avoid damaging his relationship with his daughter, he dared not say a word. Still, he could never accept Willow dropping out of school to go abroad with Makoto to form some kind of band. And Chase, so Hikami dreams his daughter, could not be tripped up by romance and certainly could not become a stain on his life. So, Mr. Liu decided to find her a companion who was exceptional in both ability and someone who could pull her out of that relationship. And I, for the sake of money, set aside my sole Karel dignity and signed a contract with Mr. Liu. 4 or 5 years. I helped Willow get over that relationship, guided her toward getting into a good university, and kept the Liu family's reputation intact. Chapter 2. To match Willow's rebellious nature, I deliberately made myself look like someone who had just been bullied, brushed past her, and then collapsed at her feet. After that, under the pretext of repaying her kindness, I began hovering around her as if possessed. My persistence gradually shifted her attitude toward me from disgust to simply ignoring me. From then on, the entire school knew there was a simp hopelessly obsessed with Willow. Even so, we still remained like two parallel lines that would never meet until the night Makoto went abroad. Willow squatted by the roadside at the airport, dragging her suitcase, crying for a long time. She hurled her violin toward the sky with all her strength. From the information Mr. Liu had given me, I knew she loved the violin, not the guitar, and I knew even more clearly how important that violin was to her. It was her late mother's keepsake. At home, Mr. Liu had exploded with rage, threatening that if she dared step out of the house, she would no longer be his daughter, but she still took with her the thing most precious to her, determined to leave with Makoto only to see at the boarding gate the boy she had secretly loved since her first crush holding another girl's hand when the violin was seconds away from being crushed beyond recognition by a passing car. I dashed out without hesitation and it tightly in my arms. Willow's face went pale with shock, her lips trembling as she demanded, "Are you crazy? It's just a broken violin, but it's yours." Dust clung to the messy strands of hair on my forehead, but my eyes still shone as I looked at her. If it's yours, then it has to be protected. The moonlight fell on our faces, stretching our shadows together. Later, Willow finally came to her senses, looked at me, and couldn't hold back from saying, "George, let's be together." Of course, I knew exactly how much genuine affection was in those words, but I didn't care as long as I fulfilled my agreement with Mr. Liu. I would have a bright future ahead. It was all worth it. The next day, Willow appeared before everyone in a long dress, her hair cut short and delicate, high heels on her feet, and I tutoring her, spending hours in the library, piling her desk with workbooks, dragged her failing grades up into the range of a prestigious university. We once spent ages discussing the decay patterns of entangled particles. When the results of the college entrance exam came out, I placed an early acceptance invitation to an astronomical observatory on the table, wanting every question to have an answer. There were also flowers, red wine, and gifts, the best romance I could afford. But that night I waited until the candles burned out and Willow never appeared. I didn't know when Makoto, Ida had added me as a friend, but I saw Willow, who was supposed to be with me, in his social media feed. At that time, Makoto had just been dumped by his girlfriend and was beginning to realize that his solo, career dream was a bottomless pit with no future in sight. But the Ito family was wealthy. He still had the luxury of trial and error. It was then that Willow began contacting him more and more often. I could picture her waiting for him to return to school, practicing unfamiliar tunes on her guitar late at night, secretly putting on makeup she didn't even like in front of a mirror, only to wipe it off again and again. The Ida family began to decline, and eventually Makoto couldn't bear the pressure anymore and chose to return to inherit the family business, and on that very day, wanting her beloved to see her the moment he got off the plane. Willow had an accident on her way to the airport. I stayed by her bedside without sleeping, caring for her around the clock. But the moment she woke up, she reached for her phone, terrified of missing any message from Makoto. At that moment, I faced the truth of the contract again. Maybe this way my heart wouldn't hurt so much. Makoto had returned. Willow had become a famous violinist in the country. President Liu could hold his head high, and for me, it was time to leave. Life was back on track. This was exactly the best outcome we had envisioned from the start. "Are you ready?" Noticing I hadn't come out of the bathroom, Willow frowned slightly and asked, but all she could hear was the sound of running water. I quickly came back to my senses, turned off the faucet, looked at myself in the mirror, and gathered my emotions again before answering lightly, "Ready." The night was deep, but I had no trace of sleepiness. I turned over in bed, then went to the study, picked up a finance book, and sat by the windowsill. Bathed in the moonlight, I read for the entire night. Chapter 3 the next morning when she saw the cold. Empty spot beside her in bed. Willow's brows unconsciously furrowed as she passed by the study. I really hate this stench of money. Why would you think of reading something like this? It's full of schemes and calculations. She lowered her eyes, picked up the book beside me and flipped through it absent-mindedly. Just browsing, I replied. But that wasn't the truth. My next step was to go abroad to pursue advanced studies in finance. Right now, I was simply preparing ahead of time. Willow didn't think much of it. She put the book down, turned to leave with her phone in hand. Though her gaze kept drifting back to it from time to time, I no longer wanted to guess who she was, waiting for her heartbeat to sync with her phone's notifications. Ever since Makoto's return, they seemed to have found new things to talk about, and the once cool and elegant Willow now smiled with a more down-to-earth. I quietly watched her chat while accepting the milk handed to her by a servant, and then I suddenly said in a light tone, "Willow, let's break up." From the moment I agreed to President Liu's proposal 5 years ago, I had been preparing for this day. My voice was calm, as if it were no more than an offhand comment. The servant glanced at me in surprise, then, seeing Willow unmoved, quickly lowered her head and left the room with all her attention on Makoto. Willow answered my words with a distracted, "And me. I didn't mind. It was just a contract, after all, and over the years I had grown used to her casual treatment of me. Still, since it was a transaction, I wanted to prevent her from changing her mind. Later I took out the prepared agreement, flipped to the signature page, and slid it in front of her, finally lifting her gaze from her phone. Willow glanced briefly at my face, then at the agreement. Without hesitation, she signed her name and went right back to smiling at her phone. I put the agreement away, ready to leave, but couldn't resist asking, "Aren't you going to read it without looking up?" Willow replied impatiently, "No need, I trust you." Then she set down the half-eaten sandwich in her hand and hurried away. Watching her impatient back, I found myself saying, "Seriously, Willow, slow down. Don't rush." I wanted to add, "What's meant for you will wait for you, but what isn't? No matter how hard you try, you'll never catch it." My uncharacteristic tone made her pause, confusion flickering across her face. But when another message popped up on her phone, she hurried off again, bag in hand, calling back over her shoulder. "Don't worry about the studio. I'll go with you to choose a location when I have time." I couldn't help but smile bitterly at her words. The location for the studio had been decided long ago and was already under renovation. It was her dream. How could I delay it? Unfortunately, since Makoto's reappearance, her matters had been postponed again and again until even she had forgotten them. But that didn't matter. I only to finish everything before leaving. That way Willow could be with the men she loved, do what she loved, and complete her unfinished dream. Thinking that, I shook my head at her retreating figure and said, "It's fine, there's no rush." That afternoon, after checking the renovation progress at the studio, I drove to my friend's bar. I'm leaving hearing that David first looked baffled, then his eyes widened in disbelief. Leaving going where back in high school George had been poor but a straight-A student. In his second year, he started dating a rich and beautiful girl, not only tutoring her daily, but even learning arts he had no interest in just to be with her. Countless people had mocked him, saying that although he could have been the strategist of his own life, he chose to be a simp. Now he'd finally come to his senses. "George, wait, are you saying you're Willow that you're not going to be the Liu family's living son-in-law anymore?" David's feelings were complicated. He was truly happy for George, but also thought of all the years that had been wasted. Then something else seemed to occur to him, and a trace of concern crossed his brow. "You're not doing this out of spite after a fight, are you? Don't tell me you'll patch things up in a couple of days." My fingertips brushed across the bottles on the bar, producing a pleasant clinking sound. I shook my head no. She and I were just a transaction. I wanted money. She wanted status. Now the deal's over, that's all. David froze, then suddenly understood Chapter 4. I knew it back then. I couldn't figure out why you suddenly got so close to the Liu family's young lady. No matter how she treated you, stay by her side willingly, even going to great length to make her study. But you two were never from the same world. Breaking up is for the best. He gave my shoulder an encouraging punch. I smiled and returned the gesture. We both raised our glasses, one toast to the past, another to the future. When I got back from David's place, I began thinking about what to take with me. Even though I'd lived here for 5 years, I had planned to leave from the start, so my belongings were pitifully few, aside from the clothes and accessories Willow had taken me to buy at the beginning. So I wouldn't embarrass her in public. I had practically nothing. I folded each piece of clothing neatly and placed them all into one suitcase, the small, handmade gifts I had crafted over the years. I brushed the dust off them gently, then tossed them casually into another box. She was the Liu family's heiress. She'd seen everything money could buy, and yet I had foolishly hoped she might look at these little crafts with some interest. Piling the boxes into a corner, I had just breathed a sigh of relief when a commotion sounded from downstairs as I reached the stairs, and I saw a man in a red tracksuit through the door, flopped down on the sofa, lean back, and start puffing away at a cigarette. It was Willow's only twin brother, Martin. Martin glanced up at me from below, arching his brow before it furrowed. "Where are your manners? The master's here, and you're not coming down to serve." I couldn't be bothered to respond and turned to walk away. The smile vanished from Martin's face. He suddenly grabbed the teacup on the table and hurled it at me. It landed on the carpet, splashing tea everywhere. George, since being with Willow, I had always accommodated them, always been polite, never once showing a cold face like two. The sudden change made anger boil in Martin's chest. "If your eyes are useless, donate them. Can't you see we have guests get down here and pour tea?" I rolled my eyes, making no effort to hide my disdain. I knew Martin despised me. He thought I was as lowly as a dog in front of Willow. Over the years, he had often come to this village just to pick fights, and each time I had yielded. But now agreement was over. I was leaving soon. Why should I endure it any longer? Martin's shoulders shook with fury, like a powder keg about to explode. The men beside him quickly grabbed his arm. "Enough, Martin. You'll never change the temper of yours." Martin's anger stalled, and only then did I turn my gaze to the man next to him. He had a straight nose, deep-set eyes, a clean face, and short, slightly wavy blonde hair. At that moment, his lips curved into a half-smile as he looked at me. Somewhere deep down, I knew this was Makoto. The Ida family had fallen on hard times, and I'd assumed he would be worn down by company matters, unable to find peace. But here he was still as free and unrestrained as ever. No wonder Willow could forget him. He pulled back the about to burst Martin with a wry smile. "No matter what, George is Willow's boyfriend, your future brother-in-law. Don't be ridiculous, he's just Willow's dog. How could the Liu family ever accept such a worthless man as a son-in-law?" He couldn't read Willow's heart, but he knew exactly how to sway the old man of the house, a penniless nobody dreaming of marrying into a powerful family. Not that he felt the need to explain. He simply shot me a vicious glare. "Why are you still standing there? Go make dinner. Didn't Willow tell you we're leaving early tomorrow morning? Have you prepared everything?" I glanced at the two of them lounging on the sofa, playing games, ignored them completely, and headed back to my room. Furious, Martin slammed his phone onto the floor and cursed. Pathetic piece of trash. I had arranged every detail of Willow's life for years, but that didn't mean the Liu family could order me around like a servant. In the end, it was still the housekeeper who brought out the delicious dishes, and only then did the smoke of battle subside. After dinner, Martin seemed ready to start another argument, but when Willow returned from her classes, his gaze shifted from my face to Makoto, and he suddenly said in a mocking tone, "Makoto, I told you back then, you shouldn't have left. Look at this, anyone can walk all over you now." He turned fully toward Makoto, fixing him with a steady look. "Why don't you just come stay at my place? Us brothers could have a lot more fun." Chapter 5. At this, he glanced at Willow sitting to the side. As expected, Willow grew anxious. She shot to her feet and looked at me. "Makoto doesn't have many friends in the country. Take care of him a bit more." It was an order, not a request. I didn't speak. After a long pause, Makoto suddenly stood up, looking troubled. "Maybe we should just go. After all, you two are about to get married. Mark and I staying here would be awkward at worst. I'll just get up early tomorrow and come pick you up." Willow shook her head at once. "No need, George, and I don't even know when we'll be getting married. And besides, he wouldn't get upset over something like this." I simply looked at her for a long time before finally nodding right. "The wedding's still far off. You can both stay here. Without..." Of course I wouldn't get upset, because I had no right to. All these years I'd only been an accessory to make Makoto feel at home. Willow immediately told me to personally prepare a room for him right next door to hers. Martin smugly. "After 5 years of being a simp, the moment Makoto comes back, you're pushed to the sidelines." He shoved me with his shoulder. "What are you still standing here for? Go get our stuff ready. We're heading out early tomorrow." This villa had several servants, but Willow's belongings had always been prepared by me. She had sensitive skin and a delicate constitution. I couldn't rest easy otherwise. Even if there was a chance something wouldn't be needed, I would still prepare it, just in case. "Martin, tagging along all these years, had enjoyed more than a little convenience from that, but right now I didn't even know where they were going, so I had no starting point. I looked steadily at Willow, who appeared awkward. She was just about to speak when Makoto, with a hint of guilt, cut in. "Martin, don't say that. We guests here. It's not right to make George prepare all our things." As he spoke, he picked up his phone as if to check where the nearest convenience store was. Willow caught his arm. "This is a villa district, not the city center. What are you thinking?" Then she turned to me, her brows tightening ever so slightly. "We're going rafting tomorrow. Go get things ready." I nodded in understanding, but pointed toward the storage room at the end of the hallway with a look of difficulty. Too sudden, we don't have gear for a fourth person. It wasn't that I couldn't figure something out, but since I was about to leave, I had no desire to spend half the night scrambling for a stranger's sake, so I deliberately used timing as an excuse. The atmosphere instantly turned heavy in the past. I would have taken care of all such matters. Without question, now the few of them stood silently in the living room, and before Willow could speak, Martin jumped in. "You don't seriously think we're bringing you with us, do you?" He began ticking off fingers smugly. "There's me and my girlfriend and Willow and Makoto at that." Willow gave me an apologetic look. "George, do you want to come?" "If you do, then tomorrow we could." Martin's face darkened and he interrupted. "No way, there are only so many seats and I'm not squeezing in with anyone." He was about to point at me in reprimand, but Makoto quickly pulled him back. "Martin, don't be like that." He glanced at Willow. "Willow, I've been overseas all these years. It's thanks to George that you've been taken care of. I remember you were always in poor health, getting sick so easily. What if something happens? Why don't we just bring him along with the matter, put that way, and worried about holding them back and displeasing Makoto?" Willow gave a gentle nod. "All right, let's bring him then." In the end, they made the decision without asking the person involved with my addition. The role of driver was conveniently filled for the full 4 hours. I drove in front while they chatted happily in the back. It had been a long time since they'd seen each other, and their memories stretched all the way back to kindergarten. Willow and Martin might have been twins, but their personalities were completely different. Martin and Makoto laughed freely together, while Willow chimed in to fill in details. They treated Martin's girlfriend, Maria, very differently from me, though neither of us had shared those childhood memories. When they hit a particularly funny moment, the four of them burst into hearty laughter. Halfway through the laughter, Makoto seemed to recall something. He suddenly looked toward me in the driver's seat. "George, you haven't been with Willow long, right? You probably never knew her when she was that pure and innocent." Chapter 6. I nodded, not caring, just focusing on driving. "It really wasn't long. Exactly the day you left, exactly the day you came back, I had filled every gap in Willow's life." Willow glanced at my serious face as if something had crossed her mind and suddenly fell silent for a moment. When we reached the service area, I used smoking as an excuse to stay far away from them. The smoke hit my face, making my eyes sting red through the layers of people. I watched them laughing and playing together in the distance, and I let out a deep sigh. It was Makoto and Willow who had endured the 500-year low period, yet somehow I was the one utterly exhausted. Luckily, it would all be over soon. I slid my phone open, checking the studio's renovation progress via the trying to cheer myself up. By the time I got back to the car, they had already bought the tickets. "Don't bring too much stuff. Everything should be available in the scenic area, but take the mosquito repellent, Makoto. You're just too much of a mosquito magnet." While Willow went through the items in the trunk, she sought everyone's opinion, still remembering to tuck the small bottle into her own bag. Even after all these years, she still instinctively made sure to take care of Makoto. "George, here's your ticket." I looked at her outstretched hand, a flicker of surprise in my eyes. After 5 years, this was the first time Willow had personally gone out of her way to take my feelings into account. I took what she handed me and thanked her for the entire. Willow had been looking after Makoto. I didn't feel a shred of joy from the outing. Halfway through, the river narrowed and the current grew faster. Fortunately, everyone was wearing life jackets, but then a couple in the kayak ahead suddenly started arguing. They pulled and yanked at each other, fighting over the paddle, getting more and more heated. Other tourists tried to steer clear. Unfortunately for us, we were the ones closest to them. The woman with a fiery temper refused to let go. Taking advantage of the man's distraction, she suddenly threw the paddle into the river. The men hurried to grab it. The kayak lost balance, wobbling, crashing into a hidden rock, and then a wave hit. We started bumping around chaotically too. Amid the screams, Willow instinctively pulled Makoto toward her. I couldn't dodge in time, watched helplessly as the jagged edge of a huge rock came straight at me. In an instant, dizziness overwhelmed me, and I felt a hot stream run down my forehead. I bit my lip hard, forcing myself to stay calm, but the pain robbed me of words. George, seeing me, Willow quickly let go of Makoto's hand, rushing over to check my forehead. "Are you okay? I'll get you to a hospital right now." Her eyes were wide with worry as she pulled out her phone to call for help. Just then, a voice cried out nearby, "Makoto, watch out at that." Willow snapped her head up toward Makoto just in time to see him brush past another rock. A muffled grunt escaped him, and thin red marks appeared on his pale skin. Seeing such a close call, it was obvious he needed to be careful. Makoto looked at his arm, his brows tightening slightly. "It's nothing serious. You should take George to the hospital first." He bit his lip so hard his voice trembled. "What do you mean nothing serious? Your hands are for creating music. How could we risk any injury? Brother, call the scenic area office right now. Hurry." In front of Makoto, Willow's earlier composure vanished. Tears streamed down her cheeks in large drops. Martin shot the couple ahead of vicious glare, and before leaving he warned them, "If anything happens to Makoto, the Liu family will never let you off." Even the coldest heart would be moved. Makoto's eyes reddened as he turned to Willow. His lips moved before he finally said, "Thank you, Willow. Shouldn't you check on George first? He's hurt worse than I am." But Willow wasn't hearing any of it. She pushed Makoto into the ambulance, shutting the door in a rush, forgetting Martin wasn't inside yet. "You were spoiled since childhood. You've never been through this kind of ordeal." Chapter 7. It wasn't until the ambulance disappeared from sight that I snapped out of it, one hand pressed to my head to stop the bleeding. I endured the pain as I walked back toward the car. See, no one can replace Makoto in Willow's heart. Only someone like Makoto deserves to be our Liu family's son-in-law. Martin hadn't gotten into the ambulance either. He stood there with his arms crossed, grinning smugly. Some people shouldn't chase dreams that are out of reach. If I were you, I'd have packed up and left long ago. I ignored the taunts and just kept walking with slow, heavy steps. When the scenic area staff saw that the ambulance they had originally called had driven off, they quickly came over with a first aid kit to tend to my wound with sympathetic expressions. The bleeding finally stopped after they applied medicine. I lay quietly on the sofa in their office, and after a long while that searing pain finally eased. I took off my blood-stained clothes, borrowed a random T-shirt outside, and, still trembling slightly, drove carefully along the mountain road toward the hospital. The doctor, lips pressed tight, treated my wound while admonishing me to avoid getting it wet for the time being. His eyes were heavy with reproach. "Why are you only coming now? It's almost infected. This scenic area is far too irresponsible." By then, I was so far past the point of pain that I just stared blankly out the window and nodded on my way past the nurse's station to pay the bill. I overheard two young nurses chatting idly. Who even were those two today, acting so high and mighty? "It's just a scratch on a man's arm," but they carried on like the sky was falling. Exactly. My husband wouldn't even make a sound over something like that. Are all pretty boys so delicate nowadays? Don't be so quick to judge. You didn't see how the woman kept following him around. She was so worried, she cried. Their laughter carried on, but my footsteps grew more and more distant, always circling around him. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. For years I'd been the one circling around Willow, and in the end I got nothing in return. After paying the bill, I picked up my medicine and listened to the doctor's instructions before leaving, stepping out of the hospital doors into the fresh air. I finally calmed down. I pulled out my phone again to check on the studio renovations, but another message popped up instead. Senior Professor O Yang is giving lectures at the academy these days. It's a rare opportunity, come quickly. It was an invitation from a junior professor. O Yang was an authority in the field of finance, and his classes were impossible to get into. After graduating from university, I had followed Willow into the arts, something I had no real interest in. Now I finally had the chance to choose again. I went to the library, bought the materials I needed, and instead of returning to the Liu family villa, I headed straight to a university in the northern city. A university was the nation's top financial institution, and it had been my only dream back then. I had never imagined I would one day set foot inside. Even with the Liu family's connections, it had always been a dream, just out of reach, and now standing under the plane trees by the sports field. I took a deep breath. All the years of pent-up frustration evaporated like smoke. I walked all the way to the school's auditorium, inhaling the air of freedom, unable to stop myself from sighing. This feels so good because I loved it. I had never truly let go of this field of study over the years. My memories aligned perfectly with the professor's fluent lectures, and the knowledge settled into a perfect structure in my mind. No noise, no obligations. My pen flew across the paper for 3 whole days. I was completely immersed in this joy. When the 3-day lecture ended, I finally had the mind to check my phone. In those days, my phone had nearly exploded with calls, an entire screen of messages from Willow, every single one asking where I was. In the past, my presence in Willow's life had always been optional, and I was the one who laid everything in front of her for her to choose from. So I thought perhaps she had just grown a little unaccustomed to my absence. While I was lost in thought, the phone rang again. My finger automatically pressed to answer, and a piercing roar came from the other end. It was Martin George. Where the hell have you been these past few days? Get yours back here right now. Don't think this kind of stunt will get Willow's attention. Your little tricks don't impress me 1B. The line went dead with a sharp click after his outburst. Chapter 8. I frowned. The arrogance in this family was all cut from the same cloth. I had wanted to ask what was going on, but with so many missed calls on my phone, I didn't even know which number to start with. With questions in my mind, I went to the studio. The moment I stepped out of the car, the workers rushed out, surrounding me with complaints. Mr. Wong, we really can't keep doing this. You'd better find someone else. It's just a stupid pool. But no matter how many times we fix it, Miss Liu is never satisfied, always saying it's almost there. Almost there? Almost what exactly? And the equipment in the sound room, it's completely outside our job's scope. I don't understand any of it yet. She forced me to go by it, then it's wrong in this way, wrong in that way. You deal with it yourself. It was only then that I realized in the past, whatever Willow Liu wanted to do, I had handled everything from start to finish. Now, without me, she had no way to proceed. After thinking it over, she must have gone to Martin and Makoto for help, but those two were just as clueless. I nodded, calming the workers down. That was the last thing I could do for Willow. I stepped into the studio to find Willow disheveled, sitting in a chair while Martin and Makoto were gesturing toward the backyard. Even covered in grime, she was still beautiful enough to be a painting when she saw me walk in. Willow sprang to her feet, the furrow in her brow smoothing instantly. George. Her lips moved for a moment before she finally squeezed out a few words filled with grievance. Where have you been these past few days? I couldn't find you anywhere. Her voice was hoarse, as though she were on the verge of tears. Taking the blueprints from the worker, I replied, went to a university for a bit. Willow's brows dipped slightly. Why suddenly go there? I glanced at her, wanting to say it wasn't sudden, that I had always loved it. If not for my agreement with President Liu, I would have done everything I could to get in, but in the end I only pressed my lips together and said had something to do, seeing I didn't want to elaborate. Willow seemed to think of something following me to the poolside. She spoke apologetically about what happened during rafting. I didn't mean it, but, Makoto was born with a silver spoon. He's never been hurt like that. We grew up together, so I instinctively wanted to protect him. I'm sorry, why didn't you tell me you were hurt too? I could have taken you to the hospital as well. By the end of it, it somehow became my fault. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. Fortunately, I didn't care anymore. My only thought was to finish everything here so I could leave in peace, but Martin, standing nearby, clearly didn't intend to let me off so easily. Just as I finished putting away my pen and was about to go talk to the foreman, a sharp voice barked in my ear. George. I turned to see Martin storming toward me, fury in his eyes. Do you have no sense of being a servant? You take the full pay, but when it comes time to work, you're nowhere to be seen. I rolled my eyes and replied coldly, recovering from an injury. Everyone froze, only now noticing the thick bandage on my head. Right after all that blood at the time, did I really need to spell it out for them to see I was hurt? I didn't bother with their reactions and walked my way on the 3rd day. While I was reading in my room, Willow suddenly burst in and curled into my arms like an ordinary girlfriend acting cute. I didn't understand, but I let her wrap her arms around my neck. She took a deep breath against the crook of my neck and murmured in a nasal tone, I just wanted to hug you. It was the first time I'd ever felt this kind of reliance. I said nothing, only tightened my arms around her until I felt a cool sensation on my wrist. A Patek Philippe watch had appeared there, a limited edition worth a fortune. I looked up at Willow in confusion, but she only forced a slightly awkward smile, coughing lightly. I was shopping with a friend and saw this watch. It seemed to suit you, so I bought it. Think of it as payment for all your hard work at the studio these past days. Her gaze flicked toward the door before she continued in a low voice and about before I'm sorry as for which incident she was apologizing for. She didn't say and I didn't ask. We simply leaned quietly against each other, savoring this rare moment of warmth. After all our years together, it was the first time Willow understood. My kindness toward her was never something she was entitled to. Passing by a watch store, she had remembered my praise for this brand. Without thinking, she asked the clerk to pack up the most expensive model. It was the first gift Willow had ever given me, and it came in such a form. Looking at the glint of cold light along its contour, I thought of the handmade crafts I had painstakingly created in the corner. My study bitterness welled up inside me. We were simply not from the same world. Just then Martin's loud, brash voice rang up from downstairs. "See, I told you that Brett cares about you most. I only just heard the news, and she's even got a gift ready for you." With that, he cheerfully grabbed the package from the coffee table and called upstairs. "Willow, is this the promotion gift you got from Makoto? So thoughtful, this style is perfect for a business elite." Even his voice was full of envy, but the moment he opened the box, Martin realized something was off. He hurried upstairs to confront us. Footsteps approached quickly, and Willow's expression turned troubled. Flustered, I slipped the watch off my wrist and shoved it into her hand. Martin's eyes landed on the watch in Willow's hand, and he exhaled in relief. "I knew it, Willow would never mess with you. Look how well this watch suits you." And with that single sentence, the watch's ownership was decided. I didn't care, but Willow's slightly apologetic gaze fell on my face. For some reason, seeing George so unbothered didn't make her happy at all. A week later was the studio's opening ceremony. I had finally completed my task and could leave while packing up my belongings and checking for anything I'd missed. Willow had someone deliver an invitation. Along with the invitation came a formal outfit. The sight of the tailored suit made me want to laugh. After all these years together, I had already bought a ticket to leave, yet Willow was asking me to attend the highlight of her life as her date. My instinct was to refuse outright, but then a message came from President Liu. "I'm waiting for you at the studio." In the end, I put on the suit that matched Willow's perfectly and headed for the studio. I stepped through the Soundwave portal, where neon tubes float along a grid, sketching an abstract outline of a musical staff. The floor was covered in a smart carpet that responded to footsteps, each step stirring ripples of sound in different pitches, a perfect blend of cyberpunk and classical style. No more reason for Willow and Makoto to argue. Sure enough, they were pleased with the design. In the crowd not far away, Makoto was surrounded by fellow musicians soaking in endless praise. "Willow truly loves you back then, when you just up and left, even after all these years apart. Your presence is still everywhere here. I'm sick of even saying the word envy." Right? And that watch on your wrist, it's an anniversary limited edition, only 10 made worldwide. I heard Miss Liu doubled the price just to outbid others, and to think she gave it to you. I remember you loved this brand back in school. Can't believe that after all these years Willow hasn't forgotten. I recall her once lying to President Liu just to buy you a gift. Sold her mother's keepsake too. You don't know how badly President Liu beat her for. We lived in the same villa complex back then, and just remembering it makes me itch. Makoto, you'll never find another woman who loves you like Willow does. Why don't you just say yes to her already? Exactly. If I were you, no matter what, I'd make sure to bring her home. Laughter rippled through the air. I stood quietly in the shadows, watching from a distance. So Willow could love someone with such reckless abandon. Without any bottom line. George, my eyes were empty as my fingertips tapped absently against the wall behind me. President Liu's voice sounded. Chapter 10. I turned around and instinctively bent slightly at the waist. Uncle Liu. President Liu nodded faintly at the greeting, glancing at Makoto in the distance, a faint Cree English his brows. "What's this? Regretting your decision?" I shook my head. Miss Liu should be standing on a much bigger stage. Someone like me has no right to even think about that. President Liu was satisfied with myself, and a water as George was outstanding, but only in being outstanding. Beyond that, he had nothing. He didn't think highly of Makoto as a son-in-law either, but the Ida family was still a juicy piece of meat. Sometimes he couldn't help thinking if Makoto's family background were swapped with George's, he probably wouldn't be in such a bind. Suppressing his sigh of regret, he handed me the paperwork he had prepared in advance. "George, since you've made your choice, then study well. I look forward to the day you succeed. It's still a while before the term starts. You can take this time to adapt early in the bag. I've also put some money. Think of it as a thank you for bringing me such an excellent daughter." His eyes narrowed slightly as he gazed with satisfaction at the young woman in the center of the stage, elegantly speaking in her gown. I looked at the envelope in my hands and exhaled heavily, relief flooding my chest. Just the thought that once this banquet ended, I could leave this place, shake off 5 years of shackles, and finally do what I wanted. It was enough to make me quietly thrilled. I pretended to be calm, slipped the documents into my bag, then raised my glass toward President Liu. "Uncle Liu, a toast to you." The liquid slid down my throat, pressing my lips together. I spoke evenly. "Uncle Liu, for Willow's sake, I want. Please don't tell her I'm leaving. You know how she—" I shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. I didn't want to stir up more trouble, and President Lee understood his daughter's stubbornness well enough. He was merely surprised. "You haven't told her you're leaving." "Well, what would I say? How would I say it?" I tell Willow that all this had been a deal between her father and me, meant to satisfy his need for control, molding her into the kind of powerful, accomplished woman he envisioned. Just imagining the fallout made President Liu shiver. Involuntarily, he nodded in understanding. Besides, with Makoto back, Willow's heart was no longer with me by the time she realized she might already have grown used to my absence. I shook my head. There's no need to explain. She probably won't care. Holding my glass, I looked up at the noble figure on the stage. A faint smile curved my lips. So this was the woman I had once given everything for. "What are you two talking about?" A light, feminine voice interrupted from the side. I blinked back to the moment, turning, and met Willow's gaze head-on. My breath caught, my lips parted, but I didn't know where to start. President Liu, however, glanced at her with approval. "Baby, you were truly outstanding today," receiving her father's praise. Willow lowered her head, cheeks flushed, pushing aside her earlier question. A few seconds later, she remembered why she had come, lifting her head to look at me. "Come on, it's our performance time." President Liu patted my shoulder, and I finally realized they had scheduled me for a program. "Let's go." Willow reached out to hook her arm through mine, smiling warmly and sweetly, but I shook my head, gesturing toward Makoto. "I'm just a composer. I don't like being judged in front of people. Have Makoto go with you." A flicker of surprise crossed Willow's eyes. Why would he willingly push her toward another man? But the studio was created entirely by you. I frowned. Of course, I knew it was my work, but every bit of it now belonged to the Liu family, and she had always chosen someone else over me. Why was she hesitating this time? Glancing at the time, I knew my flight would be taking off soon. I didn't want to get entangled with Willow any longer. I patted her shoulder encouragingly. "Go, I'll always be your solid support," seeing the genuine curve of my lips and thinking of my normally reserved nature. Willow believed most of what I said, then she turned, lifting her dress as she walked toward Makoto. Chapter 11. At Willow's invitation, Makoto couldn't help wondering, had this entire studio really been created by Willow for him? He had no time to dwell on it. Taking her hand, he led her step by step toward the center of the stage. The mellow sound of a violin filled the air. Their eyes met as if making some solemn vow. Halfway through the banquet, many guests left under various excuses, leaving only a few close friends. Soon the conversation turned completely unrestrained, with no one car in the least that Willow was still in name my girlfriend. Under the teasing of the group, Willow's cheeks flushed red and Makoto drew her into his arms full of pride. I, on the other hand, didn't care. I finished my last sip of wine, set down my glass, picked up my things, and turned to leave. I was running out of time, but my silence in the eyes of others looked like I was fleeing in disgrace. Martin saw me and sauntered over, one arm around Maria's waist, swaying with the air of an arrogant second-generation rich kid. When I came out of the restroom, a crowd had already gathered around George. Bet you never thought the studio you poured your heart into was actually something my sister built from a company. How does it feel to have worked so hard just to hand it over to someone else? He glanced over his shoulder and laughter rippled through the group. Don't you think Willow and Makoto are a perfect match? He slung an arm over my shoulder, pointing through the glass at the laughing group outside. I honestly didn't understand why Martin hated me so much. 4 or 5 years he'd taken every chance to provoke and target me. Seeing my puzzled expression, Martin's grin widened. I've always said Makoto and Willow are made for each other, not like you, some bankrupt loser here to freeload off our family. I rolled my eyes, too tired to respond. We were both college graduates, and this was still his best move, but that only fueled Martin's anger. You, a useless bookworm, thinking you could marry into the Liu family? Keep dreaming. Even if Makoto hadn't come back, you'd never get a single cent from us with things the way they are. Can't you see your own worth? Shameless one after another, they threw words at me as if even my existence was a disgrace. In the shoving, someone pushed too hard. I stumbled back a couple of steps before studying myself, only for the mops behind me to crash to the ground with a loud clatter. Suddenly, someone shouted in alarm as stacks of beer cases toppled toward me. The scent of malt and the yellow liquid spread everywhere, mixed with the shocking sight of red, tinged water flowing over the floor. Everyone froze, mouths hanging open, not daring to breathe. Willow's pupils shrank sharply at the sight. She shoved Makoto aside and ran toward me, long strides. Her voice trembled with panic as she pressed a hand to my wound, screaming for an ambulance. Who did this? Her eyes burned with fury, her shoulders shaking. Everyone looked toward Martin. Martin licked his lips, eyes dar as he tried to think of a believable excuse. "Willow, are you okay? You're not hurt, are you?" Just then Makoto hurried over, pulling Willow's hand to look her over, before finally frowning. "Bean got hurt when he went outside earlier. He's been bleeding non-stop, and he's so wary right now that even the family doctor can't get close." I have to go back at the mention of being. Willow's expression softened. That was the dog they had rescued together back in their first year of high school, and it had lived a long life since. She looked down at me on the floor, hesitation in her eyes. Makoto quickly offered comfort, all understanding. "It's okay, beings, not that fragile. Even if the one he most wants to see right now is you. Whether you go or not, you'll always be his only mom." With just a few words, he placed Willow firmly on the moral high ground. How could she love someone capable of this kind of manipulation? She glanced at me. "George Beans, heard I'll go check on him and be right back." Chapter 12. All the strength had drained from my body. Pressing my lips together, I gave a faint nod. "Go ahead, Bean grew up with you too, sharing all your youthful memories. It's only right for you to check on him." Willow hadn't expected me to be so understanding. Her face lit up with an inexplicable joy as she stood abruptly. "The ambulance will be here soon. I'll have my assistant go with you." I shook my head. I still had things to do and didn't want the trouble. "It's just a small wound. I can handle it myself." Considering how much blood there was, I was probably the only one here who would dare call this a small wound. But Willow couldn't be bothered with such details, even though she thought George seemed strange today. Bean's injury weighed heavier in her mind. Maybe she figured I was just tired lately. By the time she got into the car, she was already thinking that I should be given a long vacation. Seeing Willow leave without the slightest hesitation, I let a mocking smile tug at my lips. It only made Martin more brazen. He had been worried that Willow might hold him accountable. "Looks like Willow doesn't really care about you that much after all, not even worth as much as a stray dog. If I were you, I'd just go ahead and die." I ignored them. The ambulance took me away, and after a quick patch-up at the hospital, I rushed to get discharged. I only had an hour and a half left. Time was tight. Back at the villa, I grabbed the suitcase I'd prepared earlier and headed quickly to the garage. "Tony, take me to the airport." I got into the passenger seat only to see Martin hurrying over. He wanted to use the car too. Spotting me, he looked surprised. "I thought you were seriously injured." "Willow had me ready to keep an eye on you. Afraid you might die, but looks like you're fine." "I'm going out drinking with my buddies." I stayed calm, glancing at my watch and calculating that taking a taxi to the airport was no longer an option. Martin also noticed the suitcase in my hand. He was just about to ask where I was going when I cut him off. "Take me to the airport. It'll be the last time. You won't have to see me again. Otherwise, I won't mind spilling your secret." Martin's neck stiffened and he opened his mouth, but I just dropped a single name: Rose Massage Parlor. "Tony to the airport," he barked, sitting back down, his voice tight with anger. George had better hope he never fell into his hands again on the way. Martin couldn't contain his curiosity. "Where are you off to anyway?" I didn't answer. He kept pressing. "Did Willow break up with you?" "That doesn't make sense. She just told me to watch over you at the hospital." Irritated, I finally spoke after a long pause. "Your sister likes Makoto." "You like Makoto now that he's back. Isn't it better if I step aside?" Martin's eyes went wide. It was as if his goddess-like sister had been dumped by this guy. He wanted to say more, but I gave him no chance. The car had even fully stopped. I was already jumping out. "Thanks and farewell forever." With that, I waved, dragging my suitcase into the terminal. A day later, Willow finally returned to the villa. Exhausted by instinct, she called out for George to help her unpack. After several unanswered calls, her brows knit slightly. "Where's Mr. Wong?" A servant hurried in from outside, quickly taking her bag and leading her upstairs. Mr. Wong went out. The servant kept her head down, afraid she'd done something to displease the young lady. Willow responded casually and asked no more. Lately, George had taken an interest in finance, either buried in books or running around attending lectures, gradually picking up the stench of money among this crowd of art people. That kind of materialism was despised the most. This time she felt she had done nothing wrong, though a trace of unease lingered. There was no real worry. In fact, she felt even more justified. After all, she had told George before she left. Even though she was exhausted, she'd made a point to come see him first. What more could he possibly be dissatisfied with thinking of this great favor she'd granted? Willow's heart grew impatient. Chapter 13, as she walked up to the second floor and saw the empty study, an unexplainable irritation rose in Willow's chest. Books, books. If she just tore up his books, let's see what else he could read. Storming over to the desk, she began ripping the papers there into shreds, each tear a vent for her frustration. When the pieces fell to the ground, she instinctively moved to stomp on them, but then her eyes caught sight of the words on the page. A contract. What contract? Panicked, she dropped to her knees, gathering the pieces, trying to fit them back together. The pages recorded years of her history with George, every event, every word both strange and yet familiar. Page by page, she realized they had been through so much until the last line settled and done in an instant. Willow's face went deathly pale. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by an icy chill. What on earth was going on? Her fingertips fell on her own signature at the bottom of the page, proof that the start and end of this relationship had both been agreed to by her. Yet, she had no memory of it. Her mind sifted frantically through memories, but she could not recall ever signing this agreement. Find George for me. How dare he play me like this? Willow kicked over the chair beside her, the crisp violence making the servants nearby flinch. Then suddenly something occurred to her, and she froze mid-themos that day, her brows lowered slightly. The day she had just woken up, she had indeed signed some papers, but back then all her attention had been on Makoto. She hadn't cared enough to check what she was signing. It must have been this. Hatred clenched her teeth, and with a sharp motion, she ripped apart the contract she had just painstakingly pieced back together. George said they were settled and done. How dare he was the one who came chasing after her in the first place, swearing he'd make her happy even if it cost him his life. How could he possibly say it was over? Makoto's face flashed through her mind. Was this because she had been too close to him lately and George was jealous? Of course, that must be it. He still cared about her that much. This was just ordinary lover's jealousy, wasn't it? Maybe their relationship didn't need to change. If she kept staying high above him, their marriage would never be happy. Then, this time she would properly coax him. The thought that George had truly left never crossed Willow's mind. After all, he had loved her enough to give up his future and choose an art career. He didn't even like. Over the next few days, Willow busied herself preparing an apology gift for George, until one night she came home from the studio reeking of alcohol and collapsed onto the sofa. Then snap! The entire villa plunged into darkness. The servants scrambled in panic. Willow sobered instantly, shouting, "What's going on? Where's George? Tell him to check it." The servants froze mid-step, glancing at one another before one stammered. Mr. Wong hasn't been back in a long time." The reprimand on Willow's lips died instantly. How had she forgotten about that? It was half an hour later when the butler managed to restore the lights. The next day, Willow instructed the butler to find someone to check the villa's wiring. Martin, overhearing, froze. Wasn't George the one who always handled the villa's maintenance? Why was Willow doing it herself now? Could it be that George had never come back since the day he left? No. Next time he'd meant it. Remembering the finality in George's departure, Martin glanced at Willow as she tuned her guitar, recalling the rumor about a contract between them, one she clearly hadn't taken seriously. He smirked. This man really knew how to cover his bases, breaking up but still signing an agreement so the Liu family wouldn't dare reclaim anything. His eyes shifted toward Makoto in the other room, still busy adjusting his guitar strings, oblivious to what had happened. Well, George's leaving was for the best. Willow had waited all these years, and now Makoto was back, practically living at their side. Looked like a happy ending, for the Liu family was close. Martin scooted closer to Willow, leaning in with a grin. "Willow, have you decided yet? When are you going to marry Makoto? I'll prepare you a big wedding gift." Willow's brows snapped together as she jerked her head up. "What are you talking about? My boyfriend George, why would I marry Makoto? George is gone and you two didn't even have much of a relationship. Now that Makoto's finally back, if you don't marry him, who will you marry?" Martin said it like it was only natural, but Willow's voice trembled with sudden tension. "How do you know George won't be coming back?" Seeing the flash of menace in her gaze, Martin forced himself to answer. George told me himself. Chapter 14. When George said this is goodbye, Willow had thought at the time that he was just trying to scare her. It wasn't until he failed to return after so long that Martin realized George hadn't been speaking out of anger. Hearing Martin's words, Willow's face grew colder and darker. This wasn't as simple as she had imagined. George wasn't throwing a tantrum. He had really left the guitar in her hand, slipped, and hit the floor with a sharp clang. George loved her so much, yet he still wanted to break up. Had her recent kindness toward him made him too arrogant, too sure of her affection? He was just a penniless, powerless college graduate. What future could he possibly have after leaving her? Willow snatched up her phone and dialed George's number without hesitation, the cold, mechanical female voice repeating over and over that this was not a dream. "Miss Lou, there's no need to keep calling. We've already tried before but couldn't get through." "That's why we came straight here," said the voice, startled. Willow looked up and saw the foreman who had been in charge of their renovation. George had only handled the renovation work. Payments were managed by other people, so it was only natural they couldn't find him. As for the phone, no one could reach him. The anger on Willow's face deepened. She shot to her feet, calling while striding toward the door. He had been studying at University A. Maybe he was still there. But no, half an hour later, the head of university called Miss Lou. "Mr. Wang did indeed sit in on class at our school, but he hasn't been here for quite some time. The student who brought him and also said he hasn't seen him." The men spoke cautiously, afraid she would explode, but on the other end of the line there was only silence. George wasn't at the university. His hometown was desperately poor. Years ago they'd sold their house and even then couldn't save his only mother. Now he had nowhere to go. Willow couldn't figure it out. She slammed a fist into the steering wheel, the car letting out a piercing screech in the underground garage, slamming on the gas. She drove straight to David's house. Because of his low self, Estes and George rarely went out. David was his only friend. Seeing the frantic woman before him, David merely looked up lazily, then walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of mineral water, and tossed it into her hands. What brings the great Miss Lou here from childhood to now? Willow had never been treated like this, but she wasn't in the mood to fuss over it. She sat on the couch, fixing her gaze on him. "David, do you know where George went?" Her life had completely unraveled since George left, but in front of David she couldn't bring herself to say it. David stared at her with a half smile, reading her embarrassment in a second. Without George waiting on her hand and foot like some servant, this pampered heiress was starting to feel uncomfortable. He fully supported George's decision. She needed this lesson. Luckily, George's relationship with the Lou family was only contractual. Actually married, George might have spent his entire life unable to stand tall. David cracked open a Coke, took a long swig, and switched on the TV. "He's with you every day, and when we ask him to hang out, he's never free. And now you're asking me where he is. Don't you think that's a bit ridiculous?" Back then, she'd been the one to force George to cut ties with their group, saying that men who only knew how to make money were materialistic, that they didn't understand art, only the grind of life. George had chosen Willow then. David hadn't understood, but he'd respected it over the years. He was the only one still in contact with George. Willow didn't back down in the face of David's sarcasm. She had no other options. All these years, George had revolved entirely around her. She had never cared about his friends, hobbies, or places he might go. But David only repeated, "I don't know where he is." "Miss Lou, if that's all, please see yourself out." In the end, David shoved her out the door. It slammed shut behind her. Willow stood there, dazed. She had always thought that George's parting words had been prompted by Makoto's appearance, that he'd simply wanted to shake her up, teach her a lesson, get her attention. But now, as she exhausted every means to find him, she realized he had left no trace at all. He really wanted to go, but why? She was the one in control of this relationship who had given George the right to make that decision. When she returned home, a maid was already standing in the living room, holding a dress and jewelry. "Miss, try these on. Let's see if your father's taste is as good as your mother's president." Lou looked delighted as Willow walked in, beckoning her over. "Now that you've graduated and your career is on track, I've discussed with the Eto family about setting your engagement." Dad. Willow shot to her feet, eyes wide with disbelief. "My boyfriend is George, Chapter 15 president." Lou looked puzzled. "But you two have already broken up." Willow's lips parted slightly. She froze for a long moment. Even her father knew they had broken up. Yet she had been completely in the dark. Seeing her confusion, President Liu assumed George simply hadn't told her about the agreement they had made 5 years ago. He hadn't expected that George wouldn't even mention the breakup, but Lou clearly remembered that back then, George, in order to avoid any disputes later, had handed him an agreement. Willow's name written on it in black and white. Willow, of course, knew what her father was referring to. The thought of it made her hurl her bag to the floor, sparks practically shooting from her eyes. It had been George who shamelessly forced his way into her life back then, so what right did he have to walk away now? If she remembered correctly, the date on that agreement was the very day after she woke up, meaning that on the very day Makoto returned, George had already been planning to leave her so impatient she didn't want to argue with her father. Her eyes fell on the dress in the maid's hands, silently asking for an explanation. At this, President Lu's expression lit up. Back then, you insisted you'd marry no one but Makoto. Now that he's returned, tonight's cooperation summit between our two families will also serve as a chance for us elders to meet again. I'm not going. Willow cut him off immediately. In the past, they'd thought Makoto was nothing but a spoiled, rich second-generation playboy and had forbidden her to be with him. Later, they had decided that even if George was capable, his background spoke for itself. Time had passed, and the only thing that had changed was their stance. She was sick of this kind of control. I haven't agreed to break up with George. This had to be her decision. After years together, she knew exactly how much she depended on George. She couldn't even imagine how exhausting it would be to replace him with someone else. Besides, George had showered her with endless affection and care. How could he possibly just walk away? There had to be another reason. As for Makoto, he had been nothing more than the hazy dream of her youth, someone she had pined for over the years. Now that he had returned, it was natural to feel a stir in her heart, but the thought of Makoto sitting in a place that should belong to George sent a shiver through her. She couldn't do it. President Lu knew his daughter's mind well. Seeing the reluctance in her eyes, he sighed and led her into his study. When his assistant took a contract from the safe, Willow froze because George's signature was at the bottom. What is this of his two children? Lu was most satisfied with Willow, and he didn't want her drowning in romance and unable to pull herself out, so he spoke frankly. Back then, you were ready to live or die for that Makoto boy. Your grades were a mess, and you even threatened to drop out so you could go abroad with him to make sure you finished your studies and stayed on the right track. I came up with this plan. Find someone to guide you back into a normal life, get you into a good university. That way your mother wouldn't blame me from the other side. At that time, George had been a brilliant student, but life had forced him to drop out to give him the means to continue studying without worry. And for Willow's future president, Lu had struck this deal with him. Although George's mother had eventually passed away because of Willow, she had received the best possible treatment, and George had survived the lowest point of his life. In truth, as soon as George helped her move past that first heartbreak and got into a good university, their agreement had been fulfilled. But George, claiming he was still worried about her, had extended the agreement. Year after year, it was clear that George had truly fallen in love with Willow. If Makoto had never come back president, Lu might well have agreed to make George the Lu family's live-in son-in-law. But Makoto had returned, and the two were still entangled. He valued Makoto's family background, but he also valued George's talent. Faced with the choice, he was just as torn as Willow. Unfortunately, before he had even made up his mind, George had already come to him and stated his decision. President Lee told Willow all of this, but she couldn't take a word of it. Her eyes grew red as she stared at the contract in her hands. So all of George's patience and tolerance over the years had been because of an agreement. Chapter 16, he had given his all to treat her well? Yet there hadn't been an ounce of love in it. Makoto's return had merely given him an excuse to leave. But could a person truly feel nothing in their heart while their eyes still shone with such tenderness? His gaze on her had always lit up. How could that be anything but love? Willow's eyes, complicated, fell on the papers in front of her, but in her mind was another perfect answer George had once given her. Now everything made sense. No wonder he had stayed by her side when she had been listless over Makoto. No wonder he had chosen a major he disliked just to be with her. No wonder he had endured humiliation after humiliation without ever leaving. Everyone believed George was hopelessly in love with Willow, yet now she was being told it had only been a transaction. The last fragile illusion in her heart shattered. All strength drained from her body as she trudged upstairs, burying herself under the covers and sobbing openly. Seeing his daughter like this president, Lu felt miserable. Her mother had died young, and though Willow had been cherished all her life, she had endured no end of heartache. Love first, Makoto, now George. After a long while, he instructed a maid to bring a tray upstairs. Willow love may be gone, but life goes on. Eat something, don't starve yourself, he coaxed gently. Willow froze when she heard her father's voice outside her door. Taking a deep breath, she got up, straightened herself, and opened the door, looking at him with hope. Dad, when George left, he came to see you. You must know where he is, don't you? President Liu glanced at his daughter, unwilling to see her sink further into despair, but the thought of telling her George's whereabouts and unleashing chaos made him hesitate. Willow, he said, pained, we're better off focusing on our own lives than chasing after him. At those words, the last light faded from Willow's eyes, so George's resolve to leave her was truly that firm. In truth, her father longed to rush out, find George, and drag him back to apologize to her. But George had cut off contact as soon as he arrived. Even when Liu called the housekeeper at the place he'd arranged, he was told George had never shown up. All Liu could do was worry in silence. Downstairs, Martin, knowing George would not return, couldn't help feeling secretly pleased. The whole family harbored their own thoughts, just as everyone was waiting for time to heal the wound. Trouble struck this time with Makoto. Martin hurriedly took Willow to the Ida family estate, where several towering men stood at the gate. The one in front had his lips into a thin line, anger seething so thick in his eyes it seemed it couldn't be dissolved. Willow frowned, instantly recognizing the woman sitting on the ground. It was the one Makoto had taken away with him 5 years ago. Time had long since stripped her of the carefree beauty she once had. Now she looked so frail it seemed a gust of wind could knock her down in her days. Willow was yanked aside by Martin. Willow over here, he murmured, deliberately lowering his voice, though it still drew glances from those around them, especially the woman in the center. She glared at Willow with such hatred, it was almost tangible like claws, ready to tear her apart. Willow walked up to Makoto, worry on her face. What happened? Makoto didn't answer, but the man in front spoke instead. I'm Alex, Sophia's brother. Alex wasn't unreasonable, but seeing the grim faces of the Ida family made his anger flare hotter. 5 years ago, Makoto tricked my sister into going abroad with him. Won't even get into how much of her money he spent for the sake of chasing your soul-carol dreams. You forced her to have abortion after abortion. Now she's ended up like this, and you tell her you're getting married and she should never contact you again. I'm here today on behalf of my parents to demand an explanation from the Ida family from now on. How exactly do you plan to take responsibility from my sister Sophia? Then Alex turned his head toward Willow, a cold smile curling his lips. After all, in the years they were together, your fickleness and shamelessness, Miss Liu played no small role in how things got to this point. Willow's face flushed crimson with anger. Born and raised as a well-bebrecht heiress, it was the first time in her life someone had pointed at her nose and insulted her outright. Chapter 17. All these years, George had been her boyfriend in name, always by her side, no matter what she did. Even when she contacted Makoto, it had been right in front of George. How could they say such things about her? Sophia's eyes held nothing but hatred back then. Willow had indeed been rebellious. Leaving everything behind to go abroad with Makoto had been for love, true love. In her mind, she had devoted herself to being with him, doing everything she could to pave the way for his career. But what she never expected was that during that time, Makoto would suddenly have little trinkets that weren't from her, would smile foolishly when alone, and would carry a scent that didn't belong to her. At first she had blamed herself, wondering if she'd given him too much pressure, but later she accidentally discovered that Makoto had been meeting with Willow behind her back for quite some time. Their frequent contact now was even more excessive than it had been 5 years ago. They had fought over it many times. Makoto had assured her over and over that there was no romance left between them, that if they had ever wanted to be together, it would have happened years ago. But just a few days ago, he had abruptly and completely broken things off. It wasn't until her brother investigated that she discovered he was about to be engaged to Willow. So what had her years of waiting been for? Thinking of this, Sophia's gaze toward Willow grew more vicious. Suddenly she lunged forward with a burst of strength, shoving past Martin, slamming Willow to the ground and straddling her, delivering several hard slaps to her face. Chaos erupted instantly at the Ida family gates. Alex only raised a sharp, disdainful brow and said coldly, "So much for being a respectable young lady from a prominent family. You're nothing but a cheaper slut that's been passed around already with a fiancé and still tangled up with another woman." From and the words made Willow's pale face flush crimson. "We're just friends." At that, Makoto's head snapped up from behind her, his eyes narrowing. What did she mean by that? In just 3 hours, their engagement banquet was supposed to begin. From childhood, Makoto had known exactly how much Willow liked him, but he had never wanted to be tied to one woman. When he first found out about her feelings, he had tried every way possible to kill her affection, to no avail, to shake her off, and for his own freedom. He had chosen to go abroad, perhaps fearing the loneliness of being far from home. Makoto had taken with him Sophia Kim, who loved him just as desperately. But the Kim family was nothing like the Liu family. Their daughter could be toyed with and discarded. Unfortunately for him, fate had other plans. Over the years, the Kim family had risen in power until they could rival the Ito family. Yet even then, Makoto refused to marry Sophia. It was at that moment that his grandfather proposed an alliance with the Liu family. Makoto had agreed without a second thought. By then he had played enough. He began deliberately distancing himself from Sophia while allowing his relationship with Willow to grow increasingly ambiguous. He never expected the Kim family to investigate him, laying out his schedule and actions for all to see. When all those coincidences and accidents were pieced together, even the facade of friendship between him and Willow could no longer hold. He'd then used a lack of trust as his excuse to break up with Sophia, outright. Responsibility had never been his strong suit. After saying those words, he had turned into a turtle in its shell, leaving the Ida family elders to handle the fallout while he continued to live as he pleased. But this time he'd miscalculated. The Kim siblings had come straight to his door, and even the Ito family couldn't shield him. He had no choice but to call Martin for help, never expecting Willow to come along too. Now, seeing the chaos in front of him, Makoto felt a twinge of regret. When Sophia finally exhausted herself, Alex looked up at Makoto. Well, have you thought it over? Willow instinctively stepped in front of Makoto, only to be blocked by the body. Sophia had brought the money Sophia gave you. We won't ask the Ida family to return. Consider it her dowry. As for you, Makoto, you can forget about climbing the social ladder. You're coming back with me to be the Kim family's live-in son-in-law. As for the wedding, leave that to me. I'll make sure it's done in grand style. Impossible Willow rejected the idea without hesitation. Makoto's pride was everything to him. How could he show his face in society after something like that? Makoto, don't listen to him. We can call the police. Chapter 18. Panic flickered in Willow's eyes. She knew all too well the absurd things Makoto had done to So over the years, but some instincts still made her want to protect him. She understood that if Makoto was taken away today, his life would be ruined for good. Standing beside her nodded repeatedly exactly this is a legal detention. We can call the police. Alex looked at them as if they were telling a joke. His gaze swept over the members of the Ito family, each one hunched like a frightened quail. Of course, they all knew Sophia could no longer have children. If Makoto married into the Kim family with his abilities, he could never stir up trouble. At best, he'd be a decorative mascot in their villa. But if he refused after such a scandal, the Lee family would never agree to a marriage alliance. The Kim family wouldn't let it go, and the Ida family might never stand firm in Kyoto again. Makoto stared at Willow, small, frail, back, taking a deep breath. He seemed for the first time to grow up. He gave a bitter smile. Willow, thank you for liking me all these years. Just that one sentence, and Willow seemed to understand his choice. Makoto. His gaze drifted to Sophia before returning to Willow. Since I was young, I've been spoiled by my family, even though I'm the men. Whenever I made mistakes, you always stepped in to shield me. Thank you for your tolerance all these years. But I have responsibilities. I can't run. I can't be a CEO. Honestly, being a live-in son-in-law doesn't sound so bad. At least I can eat, drink, and have fun for the rest of my life. His voice was hoarse as he asked softly, Willow, knowing how awful I am, will you look down on me? Willow shook her head. Perhaps because she'd never experienced real hardship, perhaps because she'd grown up in a greenhouse, she believed that everyone makes mistakes so long as they can admit them and change. It's enough. At some point, the crowd dispersed. The engagement banquet that was supposed to unite the Ito and Liu families was hastily altered. The bride's name changed, yet none of it seemed to stir Willow's heart in the slightest. President Liu felt a deep ache as he looked at his daughter. Last time, when Makoto had left, George had been her salvation, but this time what could she do? And of course, such concerns had nothing to do with George far away in another country at that moment in London at Zeus Academy. I was walking out of the classroom with my backpack when I saw David, who had been waiting impatiently for some time over lunch. Our casual chatter somehow drifted to events back home. I kept my expression indifferent, showing little in. David slapped the table. I came all this way, and that's your reaction? What else do you expect? Scandals involving the Liu and Ida family spread across the country within a day, as if it was more surprising than what I already knew. I smiled faintly, but David smacked his thigh. You don't know how satisfying it was to hear it's a good thing you broke up with her Willows. The same. She had such an outstanding man, but she had to mess around with someone else's boyfriend, making the poor girl have abortion after abortion. That's what I call bad karma. I didn't care in the slightest, only amused that this guy seemed to have found religion in my absence. But then David's brows lifted. If you're so up to date on the gossip. Then do you know how Willow's doing now? I frowned. He didn't know ever since you left. Willow's been in a slump after what happened with Makoto. Her reputation in the circle is ruined. Even if President Liu still wants a marriage alliance, no one's willing to marry her. No one wants a cheating scandal so blatantly attached to them. But you should be President Lee doesn't care about family background when choosing a son-in-law anymore. We both knew the reason President Liu had delayed our engagement was because of my background. So for us this was a quiet satisfaction. Only David's brows knitted last time I saw her. She didn't seem mentally stable at that. The hand holding my spoon paused. Both Makoto and Willow had managed to ruin what should have been winning hands. Only after I left did they realize how rare it is to have someone who gives you their all. Makoto ended up as the Kim family's ornamental son-in-law. Willow, on the other hand, ignored all the blind dates her father arranged, throwing herself entirely into the music studio. In the past, whenever there was trouble, I had been the one to rush in and solve it. Now, faced with problems she couldn't decide on, she thought of my help again and again, with Martin subtly sighing in her ear from time to time. Willow only felt more and more that she had wronged me. Chapter 19 problems at the studio kept piling up, and Willow had no proper way to solve them. In her stubbornness, she simply shut the doors and locked herself inside, refusing to go anywhere. President Liu had even called me, trying to persuade me to return, going so far as to threaten me using his influence abroad. But I was no longer that 18-year-old old boy who could be cowed by his threats. I simply abandoned the school Liu had chosen for me and applied for admission in another country altogether, knowing she couldn't find me. Willow's actions grew more and more erratic, her temper flaring at the slightest thing. That was when Liu finally began to value Martin, and Willow herself nearly ended up being cast aside. The once pampered princess was now teetering on the edge of ruin. I stared down at the plate of pasta in front of me, suddenly losing all appetite. The truth was, I had genuinely fallen for Willow long ago. I'd even warned her to be careful about the Liu family's political ties, but back then Willow had met every warning, with Dista calling me materialistic, calculating, throwing every ugly word she could at me for her sake. I stopped bringing it up. Though I had quietly investigated Martin on my own, he was not nearly the useless fool he pretended to be when I was by Willow's side, couldn't make a move, and that was exactly why he had always targeted me. You reap what you sow. There is no such thing as true peace in a wealthy family. Sometimes I can't help but wonder, does Willow think of me now because she's realized my value, or because she actually loves me? Either way, it no longer matters to me. After a long meal and more idle talk, I finally saw David back to his hotel and walked home alone. Outside my apartment, my landlords, a middle school-aged couple, were chatting. As soon as I approached, they told me there was a new tenant in the courtyard. The sound of a door opening drew my gaze, and from next door a head popped out. A girl about my age. The noisy courtyard seemed to go still for a moment, if only because she was strikingly beautiful. I looked up, and for just a second I froze. Hi, I'm new here. Her smile curved her eyes into crescent as she reached out a hand. I heard there's another person from my country living here. It must be you, right? It had been a long time since I'd heard such clear, fluent Mandarin. I gave a slight nod and stepped inside to my own room. Switching from art to finance was a huge leap. Even with natural aptitude, I felt the pressure, spending every day buried in books. That was probably the first time Anna had been snubbed. She went back to her room, then reappeared at my door with a plate of pastries. Since we're neighbors now, please care of me. I glanced at the pastries, then let my gaze travel from head to toe, reassessing her after years of ingrained habit, always trying to please Willow. This was the first time a girl had approached me with such careful warmth. Though my face remained cool, I let Anna into my room. Anna was 2 years younger than me and shared many of my interests, but unlike me, she had studied them formally for years. When she saw the notes on my desk, she generously began explaining them to me, and so little by little we grew closer, becoming each other's only real friend in this foreign place. Eventually, I learned that Anna had endured her own share of hardships for her dreams. She had grown up in an orphanage. Even after being adopted by a wealthy family, there had always been a circulation inside her. No one could understand that feeling better than I could. We talked for a long time. I sat down a plate of washed fruit in front of her and said quietly, "We can spend more time together, just as friends." Anna picked up a lech and nodded firmly. "Okay, but you still haven't told me your story." At her words, my gaze grew distant. Even all this time, I still didn't know how to explain it. Before I turned 18, I'd been so poor I kept my head down everywhere I went. After 18, I became Willow Simp. My finances improved, but I was still them, and everyone looked down. On seeing my frown, Anna realized she'd asked too much and playfully stuck out her tongue. "It's late, I'll go back now. Got to be up early for orientation tomorrow." They say time flies when you're doing something you love. So when Anna came running toward me one day, arms full of sunflowers, I couldn't help but smile. "Congratulations, you've graduated Chapter 20. In the past few years, I've been balancing both study and work. And by the time it was all coming to an end, Anna was the only one still by my side. Looking at this once lively girl who had gradually grown into a poised young woman, my eyes grew hot. It was our last night. After saying goodbye to my classmates, Anna pulled me up to the rooftop for a second round of drinks. In the 2 years we'd known each other, this was the first time I had opened up to someone about my past. Anna sat beside me, silently watching the flickering lights below. After a long while, she sighed, pulling me into a tight embrace. "It's all in the past now. From here on, I'll walk with you." She knew I was cautious, sensitive, hiding every thorn so I could let someone stay close without being hurt. But she also knew I wanted to be myself, to be that eagle soaring in the sky. The next day, when I was dragging my suitcase to leave for home, I found Anna standing in front of me, smiling with her own luggage in hand. "I just missed the spicy vermicelli back at the school gates, so I guess I'll reluctantly walk a bit of the way with you." I didn't call her out on her prideful excuse. This was my first true venture into starting a business, and I was handling every detail personally. The reason for returning now was mainly work, but also to see old friends I hadn't met in years. Thinking about how the Liu family had pressured David for years to find me, and how David had refused to reveal anything just so I could live in peace. I felt a pang of guilt when David heard I had not only finished my studies abroad, but also achieved my dream. He couldn't hide his happiness for me. As we chatted, his eyes drifted to Anna, who was quietly eating beside us. He couldn't hold back these past years. "Willow's come looking for me from time to time, trying to get news about you." It had been so long since I'd heard that name that I felt a brief flicker of disorientation. I glanced at Anna, then back at David. "Well, who doesn't have a past anyway, brother? I just hope I can drink your wedding toast." Soon after dinner, David and I headed back to the Sook's family villa together, because time was short. I had originally planned to stay at a hotel, but Anna insisted she wanted to see her adoptive parents and brought me home with her. When we arrived, Mrs. Su immediately ushered us inside, asking if we were tired after being out all day. Mr. Su, though involved in medical equipment, followed domestic news closely and had plenty to talk about with me. Tomorrow I'd be meeting with investors for my company. Even knowing his future sons-in-law was capable, he still offered constant reminders and advice until late at night before heading to bed over at the Liu residence. Willow rose early and changed into the creamy, colored suit her father had provided for her, looking every inch the sharp, capable businesswoman. But as she turned, her gaze fell on the photo of George on her nightstand, and she paused. For years, she wondered what kind of men he had grown into. Her fingers brushed the frame as a bitter smile tugged at her lips. It wasn't until after George had left that she realized that even though they had carried the title of couple, they didn't have a single photo together. No wonder everyone back then had mocked George as her simp. The only existing picture was full of youthful awkwardness. A shot from high school, where he'd accidentally ended up in a group photo with her classmates. Some things you only realize you regret after missing them at first. When George left, Willow had thought it was just a matter of adjusting her lifestyle. If she clenched her teeth and endured, or if the servants paid her a little more attention, she could get through it. But gradually she discovered that wasn't the case at all. Her feelings for George had shifted long ago from liking to dependence to needing him so much she couldn't live without him. She admitted it now, she couldn't live without George. The door opened and a servant entered, informing her the car was ready, perhaps because the breakup had left her so despondent. She had poured vast amounts of time into searching for George, piecing together everything she could about him. In the end, She learned George had spent a great deal of time studying finance from her father. She heard that if not for her back then, George might never have studied art. Perhaps he would have become a giant in the financial world. Later, when the Liu family faced financial difficulties, she could no longer be the sheltered heiress who immersed herself only in love, free from competition. To ease the financial strain and to understand George's world better, she began to step into the same field herself. Chapter 21, I had learned a lot from that experience. Meanwhile, the Seo family's driver was already waiting outside. As soon as I got in, he handed me the list of guests for today's event. When my eyes swept over the name Liu, I froze for a moment. What is it? If you don't want to see her, I can go alone. Anna so quickly offered. Sensing my hesitation, I shook my head. It's fine still. I hadn't expected that the serene, untouchable fairy I once knew would also take part in something so heavily reeking of money in politics. Then again, the capital's elite circle was small. It was no surprise we'd eventually run into each other. And besides, the deal between us had been settled long ago. Once we arrived, we followed the staff's guidance inside. Thanks to the materials my assistant had given me and Uncle Sue's explanations, I already had a rough idea of who the key figures were. The further we went in, the more serious the atmosphere became. Every table was deep in heated discussion until my eyes fell on one vacant table, completely empty except for a nameplate Willow. After so many years together, I knew better than anyone how much she loved her violin. The girl I had once protected so carefully had grown up into someone practical, even worldly. I was lost in thought when a familiar voice called out George. I clenched my fists but didn't turn around. Then a sudden warmth enveloped me from behind. I was being held tightly. For a moment, the entire world fell silent. Willow's arms tightened as if she wanted to press me into her bones and never let go again. George, you're finally back. Do you know how long I've been waiting for you? Her voice trembled. I was just about to push her away when a figure rushed in and shoved Willow hard to the ground. What are you doing? Anna stood over Willow, her eyes sharp and full of hostility. For all that the Liu family is supposed to be a prestigious clan, I didn't expect Miss Liu to be the sort who throws herself at someone else's boyfriend in public in a city like this, where the social circle was so small. Of course, Anna had heard of George and Willow's past. Normally she kept her composure, but the moment she saw Willow, all she could picture was George's former self bowing his head, humbling himself for her. How could she let him suffer that humiliation again? Willow's lips parted in shock. She stood frozen for a long moment, then scrambled to explain. But I only said flatly, let's go. The meeting's about to start. If there's anything to say, we can talk later. No one understood more than Anna how much I valued this conference. Seeing Willow about to follow, she immediately blocked her path. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside to find Willow waiting. Our group instinctively headed to a nearby cafe. Anna sat across from me, her voice cold as she questioned Willow. Why are you still bothering George when you two have already broken up? Willow's chest tightened at the sight of Anna so naturally defending him. She instinctively avoided answering the question about their relationship. Never before had she been this flustered in front of George. She wanted him to explain. She wanted to admit she had been wrong. She wanted to tell him she had missed him all these years, but with all those words tangled in her throat, what finally came out with red eyes was just George. I looked at her with nothing but impatience, checking my watch. I said, if Miss Liu has nothing else, I'll be leaving. Why finally seeing me again? Willow was terrified I'd disappear. She jumped to her feet, grabbing my wrist tightly. Why are you leaving? I looked at her calmly. The agreement is fulfilled. Miss Liu has found her true love. Of course I'm leaving. I didn't believe for a second that President Lai hadn't told her our relationship was just a transaction, so that's why no matter what I did to you all these years, you still treated me exactly the same. She stared at me, desperate for a denial, but reality rarely grants such wishes. Yes, chapter 22. My expression remained calm as I looked at Willow. Your father came to me back then, asking me to help you get through that low point, and over these years you've not only managed to enter a top university, but you've also had a devoted simp by your side the whole time. You haven't lost out, truth be told. Willow had been my first love, but I had always kept a clear head, reminding myself constantly that I wasn't worthy of such a privileged heiress, that this was nothing more than a contract. Still, what boy doesn't have feelings? Year after year, the term of our agreement kept getting extended until Makoto returned, and I couldn't keep up the act any longer. But when Willow trembled and asked me if I'd ever loved her, I still shook my head. Never. I wasn't a masochist. Why would I love someone who constantly inflicted emotional abuse on me? Willow, I have never loved you. When I repeated it, Willow's face went as white as paper. I didn't care. All I wanted was to get back and share the success of our latest deal with my team. She clung to my hand, unwilling to step go, but Anna stepped between us, and so she could only watch as my car disappeared from sight. The incident didn't disrupt the conference. To celebrate our successful trip and unwind, I decided to take the team out for a retreat at the campsite. Just as everyone was enjoying themselves, a man in a suit appeared, instructing staff to deliver a large amount of food and drink. "Mr. Wang, this is from Miss Liu. She wishes you all a great time. Could you please sign for it?" I glanced at the bill he handed over, my brow furrowing slightly. "Please tell Miss Liu that if we want something, we'll order it ourselves." The one who needed constant pampering was Makoto. Seeing me reject the delivery, my team looked over curiously. Under their stares, the suited men stood awkwardly in place, but it's already been brought here. I stayed silent, and in the end he had no choice but to leave with everything. But this didn't deter Willow. If anything, she seemed more motivated, pouring her energy into guessing what I might need. The company was thriving. Signing deal after deal. Finally went to her office myself to tell her to stop doing such foolish things. "Why I like you so? I want to give you everything I have. Is that wrong?" I looked at her for a long time. After all these years, it was the first time I'd seen Willow so stubborn. "But I don't like you. The more you keep forcing yourself into my life, the more it bothers me. Willow, enough. You never truly liked me. I left cleanly. You can live happily with Makoto. Isn't that better?" My words. Her face went blank, the light draining from her eyes. She shook her head desperately. "No, that's not it. How could I not like you, Makoto and I?" Her voice shook as she stepped forward, red-eyed, grabbing my hand to explain, "We're just friends. We grew up together. So I naturally looked after him. But the one I truly love is you. Besides, he's already gone. I just want to be with you again, like before." Like before, I almost laughed. When I was 18, I stayed by her side like a dog, never wavering, no matter how she treated me. Every spark of affection I felt was crushed beneath the arrogance and condescension of her and those around her. I had been her backup plan, yet now she wanted to talk about going back to before. Ridiculous. I pulled my hand free, my voice as cold as ice. "Willow, we have no before. It was just a transaction, and now it's over. Impossible." She refused to believe it. After all, who would risk everything for just a transaction? She shook her head again and again. I had entered the Liu family at 18, spending every day with her, yet this was the first time I'd seen the proud heiress lowering herself to beg. "You're only upset because I don't indulge you like before. Willow, you need to grow up, learn to tell the difference between love and habit. When you were with Makoto, you degrading devotion fooled no one. Stop clinging to me." I set down the folder in my hand and turned to leave. Just before reaching the door, I paused and added, "I'm getting married. Let's part on good terms." Chapter 23. After saying my piece, I didn't give Willow another glance and turned to close the office door behind me. I thought the matter was over, but unexpectedly Martin came to find me. I never believed Martin had any deep feelings for Willow. Logically speaking, as fellow heirs of the Liu family, Willow's refusal to inherit the family business should have made Martin the perfect candidate to take over, yet President Liu had never truly considered him, even though Willow resisted being tied down. But none of that concerned me back then. President Li had paid me to fulfill his wish, and that matter was already settled. As for the Liu family's secrets, I had no interest. Still, Martin showed up at my company in person. Anna was a little worried. Martin might seem like a careless playboy on the surface, but he's extremely shrewd. If he's coming to you directly now, he must be up to no good. I looked at the woman frowning in front of me and allowed a faint smile to touch my lips. Ever since being adopted, Anna had been raised by the Su family and had seen her share of business intrigues. She naturally knew Martin wasn't here out of love for Willow. And while I had taken Lo's money, I'd done it at the cost of my own future, so there was no talk of hudong. Just as Anna predicted, Martin wasn't here to plead for Willow, but when I heard what he actually wanted, I still paused in surprise. "So why do you think I would help you?" I didn't even look up, absent rolling a pen between my fingers. "You can tell others you don't like Willow, but I don't believe it. If you agree to help me, I'll convince the old man to approve your marriage to her." Martin's confidence was blatant years ago. It was true that because of President Liu, I hadn't dared to truly be with Willow. Even at the height of my jealousy, I could only remain silently at her side, unable to advance, unable to retreat. But he had miscalculated the man. I was now no longer carried those feelings I'd grown used to accommodating and spoiling the only woman in my life back then. At 18, I'd mistaken that attachment for love. It wasn't until I met Anna that I understood. Love isn't limitless to its mutual respect. People like to say that after I left, Willow's life had gone downhill, but no one considered that all of this was the result of her own wavering heart. And now she dared to expect me to pay for it. I had bound myself to the Liu family for money, endured humiliation, and didn't dare have a single improper thought. I could have used the future Cincini law title to pave my career, but I chose instead to leave behind 5 years of my life in full. Now that our accounts were settled, Martin still thought he could use the old tricks to control me. It was laughable looking at me now. Confident, capable, Martin seemed both nervous and expectant. He wanted to believe he could manipulate me, but feared I might turn on him and slip out of his control. I had no interest in playing games with him. Instead, I took a document from my drawer. This is the agreement I signed with your father back then. I'm grateful for his help, but I also paid with 5 years of my youth to fulfill everything he wanted. I'm sure President Liu hasn't sought me out because he knows the deal is done. I leaned back, clasping my hands loosely, tapping my fingers together in idle rhythm. As for love, 5 years apart is more than enough to kill it. I'm afraid I can't help you. I didn't look at him again. Simply called my assistant to see him out. He froze for a moment. Though his father had never favored him, he wasn't used to being dismissed so curtly. But remembering that I was no longer the same man as before, and that I had the S family at my back, he could only swallow his pride. It was some time after Martin left before Anna finally spoke. So what he really wanted is the rest caught in her throat. She didn't know how to phrase it, but I smiled. Looks like we'll have to move our wedding up. I wonder, would Miss So be willing to marry me? Anna blinked, her gaze dropping to the ring that had suddenly appeared between my fingers. She froze for a long moment. Weren't we talking about Martin? I chuckled softly. I've been ready for this moment. Martin wanted to use his sister as bait to lure me back to help him secure his position, but he miscalculated. He never realized I'd already let go of Willow. Chapter 24. Anna couldn't figure it out. How could a wealthy family like the Lias give up on their only male heir, seeing Martin so obviously disregarded? There had to be a reason. And how much help could he really offer George? I glanced at Anna, reading the questions in her eyes, and explained Willow and Martin had no real resemblance. Outsiders thought they were fraternal twins, but my own investigation revealed that Martin was the child of a servant years ago. His mother had taken advantage of her position, slipping into President Liu's room one night when he was drunk. The betrayal devastated Willow's mother, shattering what had been a harmonious marriage. That woman was immediately dismissed, and when she later reappeared at the Low home, Martin had already been born. Whatever the circumstances, he was still of Liu blood. Even if they despised the woman, they kept the child. Since the two children were close in age, they claimed publicly that Mrs. Liu had given birth to twins. But from childhood to now, though Martin never lacked food or clothing, he was never valued. The Liu family would never be his to inherit. Understanding dawned in Anna's eyes. I see just then, bang, the door flew open. I looked up to see Willow standing there, her face taut with urgency. George, are you okay seeing me? Her tense expression softened, replaced by barely contained emotion. I gave a short, mocking laugh. Martin wants me to work with him, to come back to your side, to be the Liu family simp all over again, like 10 years ago. Her face went pale, the image of the agreement her father had once shown her flashed in her mind. 5 years in which George was bound to stay by her side, giving up everything of his own. If it had been a normal relationship, any man would have left long before her spoiled temper wore him down. But George had endured it for 5 years, and they had treated it as natural, even deserved. Willow clenched her fists, her body trembling. I'm sorry I didn't give her the chance to finish, tilting my head toward Anna. I said, see Miss Liu out. Perhaps she had truly given up because for a time afterward she didn't approach me again. It let Anna and me focus on preparing for our wedding in peace before the wedding. I stopped by a cafe to discuss a business matter. Technically, I didn't have to be there, but as the S family's son-in-law, I decided to personally deliver an invitation. The meeting was full of easy laughter until a jarring voice cut through it. George, what are you doing here? I turned to see Makoto, face twisted with anger. In that moment, I remembered the tangled history between the Kim and Ida families. Alex's expression also took on a strange edge. Sophia was still a Kim daughter, no matter her mistakes. Alex could never bear to see his sister suffer. But Makoto was different. When the Kim family learned So could no longer bear children, they brought Makoto back and the very next day sent him for a vasectomy. The Ida family had been both furious and helpless, trying everything to find a doctor who could reverse it. Whatever methods the Kims used, they worked. Makoto's condition remained unchanged. He was more fragile than before, but the more he suffered, the more his hatred festered. Somehow in his twisted reasoning, he decided it was all George's fault. If not for George's 5 years of saving Willow, her heart would have belonged entirely to him, and she wouldn't have stood by while he endured such humiliation. The waiter suddenly widened his eyes. Sophia was striding out from a private room toward Makoto. Without a word, she slapped his pale cheek, leaving it flushed bright red. "I told you to take care of the guests. You can't even manage that. Useless." She followed it with a sharp kick that sent him stumbling backward. Makoto lost his balance, staggering several steps before crashing into something behind him with a loud thud that echoed through the cafe, so didn't even blink, her voice still dripping with scorn as she berated him. Makoto sat on the floor, his face flushed with shame, his eyes brimming with helplessness and seething hatred as he looked straight at me. Chapter 25. I simply shook Alex's hand politely and prepared to leave the scene in front of me. Makoto, in such a pitiful, humiliated state, was uncomfortably similar to how I used to be when I hovered around Willow, swallowing every ounce of pride just to stay close. At some point, Willow appeared at the entrance, supporting President Liu. When he saw me watching with a faint, mocking smile, his expression stiffened and he immediately wanted to turn away. So this was the perfect sons and in-law he once handpicked. "Alex," I said evenly, "you'd better keep your house dog on a leash. Letting it run around biting people is dangerous." The truth was, I felt no personal hatred toward Makoto. He had simply been one of Willow's 2 options in her little game. But I was no longer the old George who endured unprovoked malice without a word. As murmurs of criticism rippled through the crowd, Makoto's face flushed crimson. He suddenly shouted, "George, this is all your fault. Why did you sign that deal with the Liu family? If it weren't for that, Willow would have been with me ages ago. I wouldn't have had to be trapped with this woman suffering every day." I didn't know exactly what suffering he meant, but the awkward way he walked told me enough. "My fault." I scoffed, looking him up and down with open contempt. "You were the one who used your family's power to crush the Kim family, toying with people's feelings for sport. Both sides, but in the end you got nothing. Idiot." The word idiot made his face twist with rage. After all the torment he'd endured in the Kim household, to be insulted like this in public was unbearable. He looked ready to explode enough. Willow suddenly rushed forward. Stepping between us, she shoved Makoto hard, sending him sprawling backward into a tall stack of glasses. They crashed to the floor with a loud shatter. She didn't even glance at the mess, her gaze was fixed on him. "Makoto, I've only ever seen you as an older brother. It was only after I met George that I understood what love actually is. So stop clinging to the question of whether we could have been together. Everything you're suffering now you brought on your turning." She addressed Sophia Kim with polite composure. "I'm sorry, Miss Kim, for causing you trouble." Sophia waved it off with indifference. After that one incident, Sophia had lost every shred of affection for Makoto. She had wealth and power. Why would she waste her heart on this man? Every time she saw him grovel, she felt nothing but disgust. Makoto stared at her in disbelief, then flicked his gaze toward Sophia. "Tom," Sophia said coldly, "take the son-in-law to the villa in the suburbs for a few days to recover. He can come back when he remembers who his master is." Few people knew what the villa in the suburbs meant, but Makoto did. The moment he heard it, fear flooded his eyes. He scrambled to grab the hem of Sophia's trousers. "I am sorry, darling, I was wrong." Tom hesitated only for a moment, one sharp look from Sophia, and he kicked Makoto away, clamping a hand over his mouth before dragging him out. "President Wang," Sophia said with an apologetic smile. "Sorry for the scene. I'll be there for your wedding tomorrow." I shook my head lightly and turned to leave. Willow stepped forward, licking her chapped lips. Before speaking at last, "You're getting married." I nodded in our circle. The news wasn't exactly a secret. If she was only learning of it now, that was likely thanks to President Liu. The older man averted his eyes, awkwardly, turning to make small talk with someone else. After a long pause, Willow asked again, "Are you okay?" Before I could answer, a black sedan outside honked twice. I jogged toward it, and Anna was there, waiting. We fell into each other's arms, holding on tighten. Chapter 26. Inside the room, Willow's eyes were rimmed red. President Liu simply patted the back of her hand. "Let's go." Our wedding was nothing short of grand. Nearly half of the capital's elite circles were in attendance. No one could have imagined that the simp they once despised and ridiculed had now transformed into someone they scrambled to flatter and befriend. At the reception, Willow sat in the farthest corner of the banquet hall, silently watching the sweet interactions between the two of us on stage. One glass of wine after another disappeared down her throat. Half drunk and dazed, she slowly staggered toward the door. It seemed only in dream where she could have George all to herself that she felt truly alive. Someone fell. The wedding banquet had reached its peak when a sudden cry echoed from the garden. By the time staff rushed over, they found Willow lying alone in a pool of blood. The fall wasn't from but she had landed awkwardly on a nearby decorative flower trellis. The branches tore through her skin, piercing straight through her calf. Inside, the celebration continued. Oblivious Willow was rushed to the hospital because of delayed treatment. Even after 2 months of recovery, her leg required a steel pin. If one looked closely, they would notice that she now walked with a slight limp. But none of this had anything to do with me anymore. The wedding over, I took on a back to the United States 3 days after Willow's surgery. Despite her pain, she insisted on coming to see us off. It was the same road as back then, the same violin in her hands. She held her most treasured possession out to me with both hands. When Makoto left, she had me. But when I left, then what if she had known I would leave? Why did she ever let me in? She played one last song. By the time it ended, a light drizzle began to fall. "Congratulations," she said softly, eyes on our intertwined fingers, a trace of bitterness curling at her lips as she gave her blessing. If I hadn't tangled things up with Makoto, would we have had a chance? Because she had later learned that my agreement with her father was only for 2 years. The rest of the time I stayed. That was time I had begged for. I had only ever wanted to protect her. Thinking of this, her throat felt stuffed with a sponge. She looked at me with desperate hope. How could there have been no love? But I no longer wanted to answer hypothetical questions. I only tightened my grip on Anna's hand and said, "It's time, let's go inside." George Willow's voice cracked as she shouted, unwilling to give up. But no matter how loudly she cried, our steps never faltered. There aren't so many ifs in this world. We walk through the boarding gate step by step, just like 10 years ago. The plane drew a thin line across the sky. Only this time there was no one risking their life to pick something up for her. The violin, along with her memories, was crushed into fragments under passing cars.